Welcome to our next episode of the Bravery Blueprint Podcast. I'm here with Travis Yates, my co-host, and our guest today is James Gilman. He's got a unique story that I think is relevant to our discussion in public safety in regards to leadership and well-being and performance. And during his time in the military, he's got a lot of time under tension and being deployed, and so we really want to unpack this conversation around cumulative trauma. In public safety, we deal with people at their saddest, maddest, and baddest every day on the job, and it's much like being deployed. The only difference is, in public safety, you're deployed for an entire career. And I don't think we really think about the impact of that cumulative trauma, and the other aspect of it is, a lot of us are type A personalities and men in particular, and we kind of have this bravado-ness about us that we think we're good until we're not good. Whether we drink too much, overuse our vices, shut down and don't talk to people. And I think especially right now in this time where life is exponentially faster than it's ever been in any other period of time, and you double down on a chaotic job, it's a recipe for trouble. So we kind of want to walk through James's wellness journey and get a little deeper understanding of how to be intentional. And James, thanks for being here today, brother.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm grateful to be here, to be honest. It's not often you get a platform to share your story on. So this is exciting.
Hey, before we get started, do you have anything you'd like to say, Travis, on this topic?
Well, no, I think you nailed it. I think we generally ignore it, right, Brian? Like we know how to deal with a critical incident, a single incident. We've got some pretty good things in place for that in law enforcement, but the cumulative stress, the cumulative trauma of the military, I would love James to go into this. The military typically deploys for a period of time and they come back to the States in kind of a different mindset, right? And then they deploy again. Well, there's no days off oftentimes in law enforcement. If you deal with trauma on Wednesday, you're going back to work on Thursday, and that culmination picks up and it affects all kinds of things, cortisol and all the stress, all the stuff, right? So I'm really curious of how James dealt with that and how coming back and getting away and coming back would help with that, and then how we can adapt that to the profession.
Yeah, 100%, because like I said before, this stuff isn't easy. Dealing with your emotions and dealing with what's inside of your head is not an easy task, and sometimes we dismiss it, but we all need to get better at it. Men are I hate to typecast, but we are, especially police officers. We're fixers. That's one of the things that we love about the job. We get in, we fix things, and when we take that home, there's been times that I've gotten in trouble because I treated my wife like a Jeep project in the garage, right? As opposed to, thinking about things from an empathetic point of view. And we really think about this stress and the cumulative trauma of our job, it really sometimes conditions us to not really take that deep exploration into our own mindfulness and our own resilience and get a better understanding of where we're at, how not to get emotionally hijacked, and have a good release so we don't explode on those that we care for or maybe the public, at work. So yeah, hopefully when we unpack this, that we get some nuggets we can all take away and get better. Sound like a good plan, guys?
Yeah, that's a good lead into how I wanted to start, really. So it's funny you mention that, because it's like my wife will tell me that not everything is a nail, because you're the human. Right? Just everything's a fucking nail. Just go down the line, boom, 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 fix it. The best, I guess, saying I've heard is, we all have our PhD in GSD, so get shit done. That's it. And it's like, if you're the world's best problem solver, then you're always looking for problems. And if you're the world's best problem solver, you're getting given all the problems. So whenever there's a problem, hey, give it to James, give it to Travis, give it to Brian. and you get really good at that. So you just begin to, if I don't have a problem in front of me, I start looking for one and I go and find it. And, you know, in our professions and our line of work, that can be a really good thing. You know, in the military, it's good to be a very good problem solver. It keeps you alive. You know, in the law enforcement world, same thing. It's problems all the time. You have to be able to fix it. But it's when you leave that environment, you know, when you finish your tour, your deployment, or when you come home for the night, it's not a great thing to have, you know, for your family or your wife or, you know, friends you have outside of that community. It doesn't blend very well. And you run into problems because you're always just like, where's my problem? I need to fix it. So it becomes very hard for us to just be anything other than the world's best problem solver, which is great, but it's not always great.
100%. James, real quick, could you walk us through, you know, just your experience, your military experience a little bit? You know, kind of the where you're deployed. You know, whatever you want to talk about. Just kind of give us a quick overview of who James Gilman was.
Yeah, I'll give you like the real condensed version of it. So I joined out of high school in 2004. I went into the Army as a paratrooper in the infantry. I did my first 4 years in the Army. 15 months of that was deployed to Iraq, so in 06, 07. I got out of the Army. I did my 4 years. And you do an 8-year obligation when you sign up, so they can have you for 8 years. I did my first 4. Got out, started school. My second semester of college, I got recalled back to active duty. I went right back to Iraq. So from basically 2004 to the very start of 2011, I was in the military. I did 2 deployments. So the first one was in 06. The second one was all of 2010. I struggled very poorly that almost year I was out going to school. It was very apparent that I was not integrating back into society. So when I got recalled, I was so happy. I was like, thank God, I'm going back into the Army. Like, who would have thought that, right? So when I got out the second time, I went right back into that type of work just for the private sector. So I contracted for the State Department pretty much until the end of 2013. And then I left that and I got on with the CIA, working GRS, and I did that all the way up till basically the start of 2022. So adding it all up, 18 years of service, 6 of it in the military, 3 with state, and it was almost 9 with the CIA. And then pretty much all of that time, 16 years, was spent out of Afghanistan. So when you talk about, very high risk combat zones, like that was pretty much, half of my life at that time was living in those environments and operating in them. And then doing the jobs from the very direct action stuff in the military to more of the diplomatic side of the State Department to more of the clandestine stuff of the agency. And I mean, I left that line of work fairly recently. It's been about 2 years since I've done anything with them. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. If you're looking for, combat zones and high risk environments, and like we call them non-permissive environments, like, I'm your guy. I was there. So I got kind of the full taste of all of like the spectrum of what we would do in those types of places, in those war zones. And I really didn't learn anything when it came to, wellnesses or practices, probably until about 2016. And it was a totally random encounter was when I really started to, I became curious about myself. And that was kind of like the first stepping stones of, I'd had multiple rock bottom moments in my life up until that point. That's from getting out of the military to, having immense difficulties in school, to going back into the military, to getting out again, to having immense difficulties at home with my family and my loved ones. And it wasn't, it took almost 10 years for me to go, there's something, like you guys say, the home life really sucks. So I can't wait to go back to war. Why is that? Why am I so happy to get back on the plane and get out of here? So.
Yeah, I can imagine working in that kind of environment. I mean, the military gets you ready for physical exertion. PT was not new. I'm sure you were in some of the best shape that you could think of. physical shape, but are you telling me in regards to like, I'm always baffled when I look at certain professions. Like when I think of doctors, doctors you'd think that would have a really good understanding of nutrition. Yet in medical school, you get very little nutritional education.
Right?
So can you unpack? I mean, in the military, were you given how much training overall in physical exertion, in leadership, and then what about brain science, or like how to mental resiliency, toughness, or is that all baked out or baked into you on physical exertion?
So it's all. There was nothing ever specific that was like, today we're going to work on mental toughness and mental wellness. It didn't exist. It wasn't even something like spoken about. Nobody even really knew about it. It was, the training really dictated everything. So it's like, to unpack it, I would say, and this is what I know now. I didn't know this at the time. So it's, instead of going like, what was it? It's what happened to me. That kind of explained it. It's not what did we do or what didn't we do? It's what happened to us. And we've talked about this before, Brian, but I'm going to go down kind of a list of like, this is what the training entailed, for me in the military as a combat job. And our job was to get ready to go to war and, find and kill the enemy. So our training, was things that would be, we're going to sharply tune your threat perception and give you rapid reflexes. We're going to, teach you how to have intense mission preparation, have rigorous training, and then do rigorous after-action reviews. We're going to teach you to have extreme attention to detail and minimize mistakes. We're going to teach you to have, that adrenaline and intensity to accomplish the mission, right? The mission is always first. It comes above everything else. We're going to teach you emotional control, and then we're going to teach you trust your fellow warriors. So that's kind of the training. Without getting specific into stuff, whatever it is we're doing, what I just said, it encompassed all those things at all times. So, you need that stuff to go to war. You need that stuff to have a cohesive, effective unit to go do your job with a high level of success, low level of failure, and for everybody to come home. And those are absolutely great things to have. Now, if I took all that training and I go to apply it to anything outside of that job, it doesn't work that well. It's much more difficult because, I have this intensity to accomplish a mission, but somebody else may not. So now what do I do? Do I treat them the way I was treated? Do I give them the same training? Like, well, I'm not in the military anymore. I can't do those types of things. So it's essentially the training that I got in the military, which transferred into the same contracting jobs, because that's what they're looking for. We basically, organizations like the State Department and the agency, they don't keep, their job is not a direct action role, but they need people who've done that job to facilitate them completing their mission, right? You have the State Department, it's all your diplomatic type people. Well, they need to be protected in the war zones to go do their job. So they go recruit guys like myself to go, take them to and from. Same with the agency. They have an intelligence gathering job to do in these war zones, but the case officers don't have that type of experience in combat, experience that I had. So they go and hire people like me to get them to go be able to do their job. So the jobs I did that I gravitated to after the military, it was all the same type of work, but the people I was working with were a lot different. In the military, everybody was kind of on the same page with all the same training, but I couldn't act the way I acted in the military in the State Department. It's like, hey, we're not going in to kill these guys. We're going in to have a meeting with them and talk to them and represent, America's diplomatic mission and our values to them. We don't need, we don't need a bunch of snake eaters going in there and roughing them up. And it was the same with the agency, right? Like, we're working together with this country to gather intelligence to find the bad guys. We don't need you going in there and acting like you did, when you were in the army. That's not what we need. So I had a little bit of exposure to, can't be the hammer all the time. I have to kind of adapt how I do things, but I'm still around the same type of people. The people I work with, we all come from that same, original source, which is We all come from combat jobs with wartime deployments. So looking back, I was like, well, I had all this great, phenomenal training, and it kept me alive and it kept everybody alive, while I was in war. So that's what happened to me. So it's not working so well now. So that's kind of the what's wrong. So that makes
it's intriguing because James, you talk about the military does address the mindset and the wellness part, but it's all directed towards the mission. Is any of their trainer to do anything to help self? Because obviously all of our listeners understand the data and the suicide rates and everything on folks from the military coming home. And we all talk about the VA this and the VA that and funding the VA, but it doesn't sound like there's a lot of front loading going on, even though they know the issue. So it's all mission driven and not any part of self, where I would think if you dealt with mission and self, that only helps the mission.
Yeah, that's what we know now, right? It takes time to learn these things. Kind of the joke is like the military is kind of like 50 years behind everybody else because it's a very slow process. Everything's, very doctrine. It's like, hey, we want to change something. All right, well, it's got to go through this long, arduous process to get there. And like, it was a time of war. It was not a priority. It was, we need to win. We need to get bodies into this war. We need to fight and we need to win. And that's what our military is incredibly good at. We have incredible training, incredible people. But at some point it ends. We have a super high success rate. We don't lose battles. We may lose wars, but we're not losing battles. But at the end of it, people leave the military at some point. And, the mission ends at some point. There was nothing set up, after that. It's just kind of like when I got out the first time, there was no ceremony. There was nothing. It was a Friday. I had all my stuff packed, and I think I got to see one of the guys from my former platoon. And it was like, hey man, I'm getting out. It's like, all right, cool. Hey, have a good one. And he's right back off to training.
Well, there's a lot of parallels to that.
It's just the tempo.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same in public safety. I mean, you can't even move out of your office until the next guy is ready to, he's already walking his boxes in as you're moving out. I mean, it's a bullet train. That's the best way I describe it. When you're on, it's moving, and when you're off, it's gone. And
like I don't there's no blame on this, in my opinion. If I blame the military for all the bad things that happened to me, I have to blame them for all the good things too. So it's not like pointing fingers. It's just, hey, we didn't understand it. We didn't know. That's just how we did it. Right. And I'm sure you guys can relate to that. Why are we doing it this way? Like, well, that's how we've always done it. Okay. We would change tactics, in war. Hey, we don't need to send 4 guys every time into this room. We can just send 1 and 2 because, hey, the enemy know that. So they set up booby traps for us. So when 4 of us go in the room, they wait and blow themselves up. Like, we adapt very quick to those types of things, things that have to do with tactics. But when it comes to the individual person, the self, it's not the military's priority, or it wasn't. It may be now, I don't know. But back then it was, hey man, you just finished a mission. It was a 10-hour gunfight. Nobody was killed. We killed the enemy. Good job. There's no time to even process what you just went through. As I was a 20-year-old killing people. That's like the simplest way to put it. 20 years old, killing other grown men in war. Coming back from a mission. The after action is, how many did we get? Where was it? Did anybody see anything? All right, cool. Go get some sleep, guys, because we got a mission in the morning. And that was my mission tempo for 15 months in 06 and 07. So when you talk about your training are your reps. What did you do the most? Well, like I talked about in those things of what I learned in training, like, rapid reflexes, highly tuned threat perception and stuff. That's what I did every day for very long periods of time before we deployed, during we deployed, and after we deployed. So my highest level of training was what I went and did in war. So that's how I functioned once I left. I did everything exactly how I did it when I deployed or was in the army. And then you wonder why it's like, man, it's really hard to just function kind of outside of that environment.
Yeah, Brian, you may be able to address this better than me, but you look at the cortisol levels and the adrenaline and all the things that are dumping in your body during those high stress situations, James, and you were doing that daily. No really recovery point for that other than maybe a few hours of sleep. There must be a tremendous transition when you're out of that environment and you're away from that environment. Just take our audience through what that would be like of going from that environment to, say, back home. What does that feel like mentally, emotionally, physically? What's that feeling like? Because some of our audience may be experiencing that on a smaller level from their profession as well.
So, I mean, there's my perspective, and then there's like the human aspect of it. It's how, we all have pre-programmed responses inside of us that, they develop in the womb at birth, right? That's those, like the sympathetic and the non-sympathetic responses. So sympathetic being like that fight or flight, and then non-sympathetic, it's kind of like rest and digest. And your body builds essentially pathways in your brain called myelination. It's what you practice the most, you become the most efficient at doing. So I wouldn't even be in that war zone environment, right? Like I'm back home and something, mimics something I experienced in war, and I get the same physiological response to it. Right? I will get that adrenaline, to jack me up, that cortisol to shut down any non-essential systems, you get the same reactions as you would in a fight or flight situation to something like a bird flew into a window and made a boom noise. And that sounds like, something close to what you experienced in war, whatever that situation is. And your brain goes, you're in fucking danger, right? You need to juice up right now and survive. So it's a pre-programmed survival mechanism inside of me that you don't have any control of when it happens or it doesn't. And it's just going off nonstop, right? So when I talked about that kind of that training of the trainings I experienced, like, having sharply tuned threat perception and rapid reflexes, what's kind of a symptom of if that's working over time, all the time? Hey, that's your hypervigilance, hyper alertness. And I know a lot of guys can attest to that. Like, I'm just like turned on all the time. I can never just shut it off. Well, your body's doing exactly what it needs to do to survive. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing broken. It's just you've had an immense amount of time in an environment that caused you to go into that sympathetic response, fight or flight. And now your body's just going, hey, man, you need to be hyper vigilant, hyper alert because we think something's going on. The issues that we run into is, hey, that's an involuntary response from our body that instead of us responding to it, now we react to it based off my highest level of training. So yes, when a bird flew into a window, I assumed something's happening, something's wrong. I need to go fix that problem, right? I need to become the problem solver again. And, you get jacked up, you get amped up. And then the people around you are like, what the hell is going on with this guy? Why is he sweating profusely? Why are his, pupils all the way open? What's wrong with this guy? You hear that a lot. I'm sure people listening, if they've been in those situations, they get told that, hey man, what's wrong with you? Why are you like this? What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? Nobody ever goes, hey, what happened, man? You're in a safe environment. Nothing's happening. Like, what happened to you in the past? This is the type of reaction you have. Like, you're not responding to what's going on. You're just reacting. It just looks like it's automated. And that runs in, and then, you might begin to believe like maybe there is something wrong with me. Maybe that, that 4-letter word we don't like, PTSD, like maybe there's something broken or something's not functioning correctly. Maybe I am messed up. None of us are broken. There's nothing wrong with us. It's not what's wrong with us. It's what happened to us. And that might answer the question of, why didn't the military give us anything to help with that? Well, they didn't know about it. They only knew what was wrong. They didn't know what happened to us. It's the same with the medical fields, right? That's where I would start. You go to a doctor, hey, I got chills. This is what's wrong with me, right? I got chills. I don't feel well. I feel sick. And it's the doctor's job to go, all right, I'm going to find out what's wrong with you. I'm going to diagnose you. That's kind of where the medical field misses us. Instead of going, all right, what happened to you? They just, hey, man, I'm just going to diagnose you and tell you what's wrong. You got PTSD, right? Because you have all the symptoms. PTSD is a diagnostic term in the medical field, right? It's the same as if I said, I've got the chills, the aches, I'm coughing, I have a fever. All those are symptoms. All right, you have the flu, right? Hey, I've got hyper alertness, hyper vigilance. I'm reliving events. I have guilt. I'm second guessing. I have intolerance to mistakes, lack of empathy. Anger and rage. I'm detached. I'm numb, and I have social withdrawal. They go, you have PTSD. All right, that's what's wrong. They don't go, hey man, what happened to you? Well, I had an extremely rigorous training for 16 years that kept me alive in war zones. I don't have any way to self-regulate myself. All I do is self-medicate with either, pills, alcohol, buying something I don't need. It had nothing to do with the medical field sucks or the VA sucks or the military doesn't do a good job. It's people weren't asking the right questions. Everybody would just want to know what's wrong with them. What's wrong with our veterans? Why are they killing themselves? Why do they all have PTSD? Nobody said, hey, what happened to these guys? Let's look at it. Because any rational person with any type of empathy or curiosity for that matter would go, wow, James has been through a lot of shit. He spent 16 years of his life in super high stress combat zones under super high risk environments. Yeah, okay, that makes sense why he has these symptoms, why he has that, diagnosis of PTSD, which is just accumulation of symptoms. Yeah, okay, now we can start to, perhaps help him, or he can learn this on his own, and, he can find ways to tell us that we can help him. So that's where I believe the disconnect is. It's not that people don't care or, they don't like us or that we've done something wrong or there's, some egregious moral crime we've committed. It's, hey, they just don't know because they just don't ask the right questions, because doctors are still put through a school just like I went through schools in the military. They're still trained a certain way. They're trained to diagnose people a certain way. Like, they don't have all the answers. They need our help. There's I don't know if you guys are familiar with Thucydides. He was an Athenian general and historian. So way long ago, he said, a society that separates its scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools. So I'm like, that really resonated with me, because I'm like, I could sit here all day and talk about the shortcomings of our, the military and the medical field and the VA and whatnot. But I can go, it's also, I don't serve my country anymore, but I can still serve my community. And that service is, I can go share my story with these people that do want to help. And it is their job to find out, why are our veterans and our law enforcement first responders killing themselves at a cyclic rate? Why do they all have depression and anxiety? Why do 30% of the people in our country, 100 million people, all suffer from the same things that our veterans have been in war, but they've never been to war? Hey, maybe I can share my experiences and tell you this is what happened to me, so they have a better understanding of it, so they can better help us in the future. So it's like, it's not just, I can't just go to the VA and go, fucking fix me, doc, tell me what's wrong. If we brought it all the way back to the start conversation, the one thing that we could all do is, like you said, ourself. Are we curious about ourself? What do we know about us as individuals? Not everybody else. Well, what I know about me that I can take to these organizations, to these, practitioners, and go, this is what happened to me, this is what I'm experiencing. Use me, learn from me to better help others. So that's kind of the part I think that we're missing. It's just much quicker to go, fuck the VA, fuck the medical field, fuck the military. I'm just going to go, drink, and, I'm broken and I'm a shell of my former self, and this is the best I'm going to do.
Well, this is the powerful, but this is why we're doing what we're doing, right? It's to build a band of people who are courageous and lift each other up and inspire other people to take action wherever they're at in their journey, in leadership and in their resiliency pathways. And, because we have, again, military and public safety have a lot of the same problems associated with them. And when we do, like Travis said, when we integrate the me and the we, we compound operational excellence. We don't have to pick one or the other. And that's like the challenge that I had when I promoted into management with the police department. It's like, pick a side, right? You're either, like there's this arbitrary moat, there's this moat in between the organization, and it doesn't have to be that way, because I think you can enhance performance, enhance resiliency, well-being, community trust, anything and everything that you want in an organization when you are a team, and when you come from a point of caring. And I know Travis feels the same way. I've read his book. I know how passionate he is about this, and so it kind of really dovetails nicely. And walk us through, because your wellness journey, again, you were a guy I know, because we talked. You figured a lot of this stuff out on your on the backside of your career. You had to kind of get plenty of scars, to get to that point, but you were determined enough to go, okay, well, this isn't my final story. There's plenty more chapters to be written. What do you think? How important is having a network? Like you can call them peer support, or just a band of brothers, however you want to say, but just this camaraderie of people around you. And how does that play in and maintain your mental toughness and resiliency and overall a mental fitness?
So so for me, it was, I guess for the longest time, again, going back, like not knowing, what happened that was the biggest roadblock for me. Once I began to understand that's when like doors started opening up. Like it started to make sense. I was connecting the dots. And I want to say it was in 2016, a good friend of mine, his girlfriend gave me a book. I'd never met this woman. It was like a very quick interaction. She goes, "Hey, Ellison told me, kind of what you did. Here's this book I think you'll like." And I was like, "That's really fucking strange." Okay. And I kept this book for like 4 months. I brought it with me on a trip, working. And it was the book Tribe by Sebastian Junger. I don't know if you guys have read it. So the book is all about, not feeling connection and like the importance of connection. And like I guess, where do you fit in the big scheme of things? And I'm reading this book and I'm like, oh my God, this thing is like speaking to me. I feel like it was written for me. So it kind of sparked this, okay, well, what else don't I know? And this is written by a guy. He wasn't in the military. He didn't do any of the things I do, but he's totally relating to me, and all these people he's writing about are relating to me. So I guess it starts with, the kind of the key to it is, if you want to start somewhere, start with, hey, start being curious. Go reach for things outside of, you say peer group and everything. Like if I'd continued on the path that I did as the people that I were around the most, right? So, you're influenced by the people you spend the most time with. That's kind of like what your parents used to tell us, right? Like, don't hang around with the bad crowd, right? You'll end up doing bad things. If I was to stay in the peer group I was at, it's kind of like I would have plateaued long ago, because it's like we're not looking for things outside of what we're already doing. My life used to be training. If I wasn't training, I was, going to courses. If I was on my own time, like at home, I'd still be going to courses. Like I'm trying to better myself, as a gunfighter, right? So being curious about myself and going, I need to branch out and leave this bubble that I'm in and go talk to people outside of that bubble. That was where it really started. So that's kind of what my peer group became. Of I'm not just hanging out with other vets or guys I was in, contracting world with. I'm going to go talk to guys who are, psychologists, or I'm going to go talk to guys who are like artists and painters, and just be around these people and kind of see how they do things and just learn from them and see what I learned about myself. And, I've had a very like diverse group of people I've hung around from, guys that were billionaires who, did stuff in like, the stock market, to guys who were like struggling artists, to, guys that were in the first responder stuff, like firefighters, other police officers. Like, let me get a taste of everybody here. Let me, see what you guys are about. And like, these are also people that I was comfortable sharing my experiences with. So kind of the core of it was, these are people that I have, a trust and connection with. I don't just go find random people on the street and go, hey man, I went through all this shit. You want to have a talk about, post-traumatic growth? They'd be like, get away from me, man. I still had guys that I was very close with in the agency that were even open to having some of these conversations. People that had nothing to do with the military and nothing to do with contracting. People from totally different walks of life. So that's kind of where it started, for the importance of, it was a peer group, but it wasn't just peers in the sense of these people have all done the same thing I have. At some point, I'm going to reach like a limit of kind of, hey, what do we all know combined together? So I think that's kind of what worked. That's what worked for me, is leaving the established peer group and go and making a new one, and making these people that, hey, I do have, the most important was I do have a trust and connection with them. If something doesn't happen in a day, it takes, years to develop these relationships. All right, hey, I'm going to talk to you about some stuff. And in the meantime, it was, I'm going to read more. I'm going to read books, about, hey, I'm going to read some stuff about human physiology. I'm going to read stuff of, what's, trauma due to the brain and the body. The one I recommended for you, Brian, was that 7.5 lessons about the brain. Reading that should just have an understanding of like, what is our brain doing under all these things? Like, I have no idea who the doctor is that wrote it, but she's an expert in her field. So that's kind of, hey, that could be something in my peer group, right? Of, hey, we both been through a lot of trauma and we study trauma. I may just, have received a lot more of it, but you can help me in some way. Or, I'm going to remain curious and just hear what you have to say. Even though I probably don't agree with some of it, or maybe I just don't like you, I'm still going to listen to what you have to say.
James,
that's kind of where.
No, that's fascinating. And I want to kind of bridge what you're talking about and apply it to law enforcement that may be listening to us, because I think a parallel here is retirement. Law enforcement is told that retirement is this some sort of just short of heaven type experience, and this is what you're working towards. And they don't really prepare the profession for what that is. And it is, although there's not going to be the traumatic events that you went through in combat, 20 or 30 years of those cumulative events, and then you step out of that environment, all of a sudden you don't have the same friends, you're not around the same people, nobody seems to want to talk to you. You're going to have a feeling of, what's my purpose? What am I doing here? And I was actually talking to a friend of mine just the other day, and I said, man, listen, I don't know why I'm feeling this way. Like, I want to feel like I felt when I was 21, 22 with my mind. Like, I feel like almost there's parts of me that's been removed through anyone that's been in first responder world for 20, 30, 35 years. They're not going to feel the same they felt when they started. And I said, and he says, well, you keep chasing something you're not going to get. And I want you to sort of explain our crowd. He goes, this is his quote to me. There's a possibility you're never going to feel that way again. This is who you are. And I would assume that in the military, it's the same thing. Like, your mind and the emotions and sort of the virgin ideas and thoughts, the idealistic attitude that you had as a young person before you entered the field, you're never going to really get back there. But how do you cope with that, right? And I think what you just talked about is very sound. If you need to be around different people, new people with different perspectives. I actually find myself around a totally new crowd of people just a year out of retirement. Kind of explain, if somebody's thinking that way, how they can accept the fact that I'm probably not going to ever feel the way I thought way I was told I could feel again. This whole refreshing feet on the beach, it's full relaxation. It's not like that at all, right? So how do you explain how, in your perspective, how you can still deal and adapt to where you are today?
So again, for you guys and anybody listening, I believed myself, to be a paratrooper or a contractor or, a GRS guy, until, 2 years ago. My entire, I guess, all my accolades in my life was tied up in this thing that I did, right? And I didn't want to let go of it, right? Because it was like, God, I was, amazing. I did incredible things. I, defended our country. I met amazing people. I just did shit that nobody else gets to do ever in their life. All the stuff you see in the movies, like I got to do it. And you hold on to this thing, you never want it to let go. And it's how I reframed it and looked at it. So it's like it was the best job and the worst job all at once. And very people with much more time even than me, and these are people I'd be in my peer group. They would say, how can you live the rest of your life, wanting something else? That's the opposite of growth. Because I don't want to grow. I just want to revert back to how I was. That's like kind of the word resilience. I don't know if I agree with it as much, because like resilience is just this thing I have, and I'm going to keep building it until I just become better. I become very resilient. I'm much more a fan of like, I have to grow. Because growth is fucking painful and it's scary. You guys ever heard the lobster analogy? Right? Like a lobster, when it starts getting bigger, its shell doesn't change the same size, right? It's that nice juicy lobster meat in there, and the lobster's growing. He's like, God damn, I'm so uncomfortable. He's got to go under a rock, shed his shell, be really vulnerable because he took his armor off, grow, and then regrow the shell. All right, I'm new again. All right, and then when the lobster gets a little bit bigger, he's got to do the same process again, right? I got to go in this cave. It's scary. I might get eaten because I'm not going to have my armor, but it's the only way I can grow to be super lobster, and be delicious for somebody when they catch me. So that's kind of like the I guess lighter analogy that was told to me. Growth is fucking painful and it's scary and it doesn't feel good, but that's the only way you move past. Or not move past, but it's the only way for me, I reconciled with, man, I used to be in the Army. I worked for State Department. I worked for the agency. I did all this cool shit. That can't be where my life ends. On my tombstone, it can't just be, he did some Army stuff, State Department, and CIA shit until he was, 35 or whatever. And then it's just blank. And then he died when he was 80. Like that's not the story I want written. So I had to reframe. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
So it was, I had to learn to grow, and my growth came from, hey, I'm curious about stuff. So maybe these things I did aren't as interesting anymore. I'm much more curious about what happened to me. How do I move past this? How do I continue to serve not only my country, but myself and others in my community? And then the reality is, everything I've been through and my struggles and my rock bottom stuff, like that's my greatest source of strength and growth. So like, that's how I was able to, all these things that were cool and everything, they were also really difficult and hard. And that's like how I'm going to look at it from now on, is that thing I did is now going to be my greatest source of strength to grow out of it. So it's like, it's still valuable to me and useful, but I just don't look at it anymore of, from the operational side. I used to be great with a rifle and we got to go do cool shit and all that. I look at it as those are the things that are going to help me grow out of that and become a better person, and more successful. And that's how I looked at it.
Well, I love the word that you used a little bit ago.
Lobster?
Well, no, it's vulnerability. And because of the fact, curiosity's, an essential asset, especially, I used to say to my troops, curiosity may have killed the cat, but it takes a lot of bad guys to jail, right? You got in order to be furious, you got to stay curious, so you just get like, that's where but vulnerability is something that, and we see how it impacts organizations, like for example, a meeting. Nobody wants to ask a stupid question because then everybody's like, you're stupid, right? But maybe that stupid question's needed to catapult the conversation into a different way of thinking or new innovation. And it's not, it's this whole mentality of let's fail faster so we can learn faster and grow. But you have to be vulnerable first. And so, it's hard to be vulnerable. It's really hard because, you've got to kind of say, well, I didn't do that so well, or I need help. But the great part about vulnerability is, human beings, because we have this capacity for connection, we crave it, that a lot of times when we do raise our hand, somebody's running up to help us. I mean, that's the greatest thing about the human condition is, if I raise my hand, chances are somebody's coming, and maybe even the cavalry's coming. But the issue is getting somebody to raise their hand. And I know that this is not something that's easy for people, but it's definitely very much needed in a growth mindset.
It's also, it's another one of those kind of inhibitors that we've seen of, like people look at vulnerability as weakness, yet they're two separate words. And if you define both of them, there's a definition for every word we have. Weakness is essentially, I am not open to attack. Like, I'm not going to let anything happen to me, right? Where vulnerability is literally the opposite. It's, I'm opening myself up to attack because I accept it. But they'll use weakness and vulnerability in the same sentence. You're weak because you were vulnerable out there. They're defined completely different. Like, I'm opening myself up to attack. That takes courage and bravery. Not doing anything, that's weakness. That's cowardice. So kind of in the world we live in now, in our culture, it's, hey, and this is especially true in the military. It wasn't necessarily, mental toughness training, but it was, hey, suck it up, right? Quit whining, just keep going. You're not dead. These guys are dead, so you should be grateful you're alive. It was just this mentality of just suffer. Just fucking suffer in silence and keep going because the mission is more important than you. Like, what do you call a person that likes to suffer?
Masochistic.
A masochist, right? So I'm like, I was trained to be a fucking masochist. Holy shit. Like, I have people even to this day that I'm like, what's your greatest asset? They're like, I'm so great at suffering. They're proud of it. They wear it like a badge. Well, if they're really great at suffering, they're never going to be vulnerable. Like, why? I can just endure it all the time. Our vets are killing themselves. Nobody
James,
even knows
the military recruits around suffering, right? The military recruits around suffering. They make it look sexy. Yeah.
It is. It's like this thing to be proud of, right? Great. That helps. That is useful in war. When I'm on day 3 of not sleeping and I'm being shot at carrying 100 pounds, yeah, I'm going to have to suffer. But when I do that and get thousands and thousands of reps of it, we talked about, what does that do to me? Hey, I'm training myself to say, this is how you're going to act. This is how I'm going to behave. And at some point, this war I'm in is going to end. And I'm going to go back, to where there's not a war. But I'm still going to continue to suffer. My suffering may not be, in a gunfight now. My suffering may be internally. I'm just going to suffer through my grief. I'm going to suffer through, depression, anxiety. I'm just like, I'm not telling anybody I'm fucking fine. I'll find a way around it. Right?
Well, suffering's good
seriously
for endurance sports, right? Like I've cycled over the Continental Divide and it sucked. And so you have to be at one with suffering. So I totally get your point. But there's this, we see it in public safety. It's not suffering so much as it is cynicism, right? There's this there's this badge of honor by being a really good cynic. And, but again, going back to that repetitious, process of getting good at anything, it's repetition, repetition, repetition. And when you're constantly in this mindset, you're missing so many good opportunities for growth, or just having a good positive attitude. And what kind of doors does that open? Or just, hey, I'm going to be in complete denial that I need to work on any of this stuff. Yet, public servants have the worst cops in particular have some of the worst cardiac profiles of any profession studied, meaning you're going to die early if you don't deal with the trauma, the well-being that you're not paying attention to. And just going to the gym is it's not enough. I mean, you got to do the mental reps as well.
Yeah. And it's like suffering is fine, having being, having rapid reflexes and sharply tuned threat perceptions, all those things are fine and great to a point. But if you want a balance in it, hey, if I am great at suffering, I should also have something that I'm great at to come out of that suffering. It's like extreme behaviors, right? Like you see it all throughout, our nation now. Everything's like the extreme. That's like our culture, right? The biggest car, the biggest house, the most money, the biggest ring. Well, we also have the extremes when it comes to the emotional side, the most extreme reactions, the most extreme ideologies, the most extreme to everything. Like suicide is an extreme reaction to something, right? Somebody who's suffering so bad at the extreme level, their extreme answer is, I can't take it anymore. I'm done. There's no self-regulation. There's never going to be any growth because you're stuck in the extreme all the time. And that's the part that has been constantly been missed. And that's what I believe. If I don't keep suffering, I'll stop being good at suffering and I won't be able to do my job. Well, hey, have you ever thought, you can, still do that and have something else to self-regulate? Because only you can do that. Nobody can do that for you. I can't go, all right, how many times does this work? Let's say you have an argument with your wife, right? Hey, just calm down, dear. Right? I'm pissed about something. My wife would attest that to me. James, just calm down. Calm down, sweetheart. And I'm like, fuck no, I'm not calming down. I'm not doing any of that stuff because I'm mad, right? Is that my fault or hers? That's my fault. I don't have the ability to self-regulate. So I just cause my own problems. That's the difference between I'm just reacting to what's going on. It's just running me. I'm just reacting based off my highest level of training. I am what I repeatedly do the most, instead of responding to it going, holy shit, you're right. There is nothing going on. Okay, what are my self-regulatory practices to bring me back down to a normal level? And we're missing that. When it comes to our guys in military, law enforcement, first responders, it's just, hey man, the mission, you got patrol, you got bad guys to catch, the firefighters, you got to go on this call. I know it's like the fifth one tonight. And then when everybody's done, it's just, all right, refit and get ready to go out again. There's no, hey, I'm going to practice some self-regulation, whatever my practices may be, before this next one happens, so I'm on nice and even keel. So it doesn't just compound, over years and years and years. Like you said, a good friend of mine who is fire department commander, chief, he's in charge of a whole group. He's like, same thing. I've heard the same thing. Hey, I get all my trauma over a period of 35 years. You guys get yours all front loaded. It's like, yeah, that makes sense, So I just get it all at once. You get it over a longer period of time. It's the same thing. We're still missing that piece of what do I do?
So walk us through I get curiosity's big component of, being mindful in this space on just, growth and mindfulness, resilience, however you want it, combating any kind of, trauma or cumulative trauma. What other things have you found useful in your essentially just in your own growth process?
Certainly it all starts with that core. Where are some people in my life I have trust and connection with? That's huge. All right, I can't do this on my own. some of it is, it's up to me as an individual, but I still need help, right? That's the part we just said. It's so hard for us to ask for help, to be vulnerable. I'd say that the first part of it is I have that core group of people with trust and connection. So that next thing I need is education. And I'm not talking you go to school. Like, education isn't found only on a college campus or an online course. I can educate myself. I can remain curious about myself, other people, other professions, my community, the world, right? I can read books. I can go back in history and be like, we're not the first people experiencing this problem. There's been a lot of human beings and civilizations before us. What did they do? What did they say? Like, Thucydides was an Athenian general. That's a long time ago. He said some very wise things that stand true today. Like, wow, they didn't have iPhones and the internet back then, I'm pretty sure. So they were clearly thinking about this stuff, right? You can look at any of the Stoics. You can look at Marcus Aurelius. You can look at Epictetus, Socrates. They all had these very wise things to say thousands of years ago that all pertain to us now. All right, so my first, path to growth was I'm going to educate myself. And I'm going to do that, the way the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to read books. I'm going to get quotes. The next part of it would be that self-regulation. And that's those practices that I do. That's something I do every day, regardless, to keep myself, even. I'm going to ask you guys, the difference between a practice and a hobby.
Well, I look at it like when you think about things that you're doing. I mean,
yeah,
look at
things
rituals.
I'm doing every day.
I think the things that I want to make sure that are like non-negotiable in my day.
Mandatory versus optional, right?
I put those in a ritual bucket, right?
Right. I look at my regulatory practices as a hobby, meaning practice. It's deliberate. I'm doing it deliberately every day, or a hobby whenever I want. That's how I would go about it, executing it. And those practices for me. So it's like, these are not huge things that I do, but they're things that help me. So I wake up at the same time every morning. I practice a thing called OTM, Own My Morning. And this is what sets me up for my whole day. And that practice consists of, hey, I get up, I read, I have a prompt every day, a thoughtful prompt. I respond to that prompt. I can write it. I read from the Daily Stoic book. It's got a page for every day. So those are the first things that I'm seeing when I get up. I'm thinking, I'm analyzing myself. And then I journal and I practice gratitude. And then I go and exercise for 30 minutes. And exercise to me is defined as, hey, something fun and a break a sweat. And that's it. That's how I start every day.
I'm so glad, James, that you're not doing cold plunge, because I was going to get guilty. I feel guilty if it was your every morning routine.
I used to. It's just very hard to find a cold plunge. But again, it's like, I have so many wellness practices, and I've tried so many over the years. Like, I didn't just come up with these in a day. Like, this took me 10 plus years to figure out. I'm not doing these to feel better. I don't feel better after I do these. I'm doing these so I will do better. And I know that because when life happens, when shit happens to me, I'm aware of, did I react to that or did I respond to that? So, like, my wellness practices have been refined to, I'm not worried about my feel. I'm worried about, am I doing better because of this? Am I a better communicator with my wife? Am I a better husband? Am I a better asset to my community? That's how I went about finding what they were. And these are not crazy things. There's no apps required. There's no monthly subscriptions. I read a book. I write, based off what the book was talking about, how it relates to me. I practice gratitude, meaning I am grateful for this, because, not just, hey, I'm grateful, for another day. If I can't explain why I'm grateful, it doesn't pass my sniff test. That means it's bullshit. So I have to go, all right, I'm grateful because, and I practice those every day. And then physical exercise. Who doesn't like to do that? I'm not trying to go and do some crazy CrossFit shit. I'm just, what can I do for 30 minutes that I'm going to enjoy, and I'm going to break a sweat, and I'll feel better afterwards. And that's there's 1,440 minutes in a day, right? There's 1,000 if you get 8 hours of sleep. All of that, my morning practice is 60 minutes. So that still leaves me 940 minutes to go about doing everything I need in the day. So when there's those days going, I don't have enough time, I don't want to do it, I go, no, you get 960 minutes to do this. You got plenty of time. Go do it because you need it, because you need to be able to do better. Not feel better. I can feel better just, having a coffee or getting in a cold plunge. I'll feel better, right? I'm not going to do better because of that.
That's so valuable, James. And I can just speak from personal experience. I have a similar routine that involves daily Stoic, the John Maxwell Leadership Bible, red light therapy, and working out. Coffee's in the middle of all that. And the days that I get up and I'm intentional about that, my day is completely different, completely positive. Everything works. But there are days that I don't do that, and it's a cluster, right? I put things off till the afternoon. I don't get to them. Something comes up, and then you get to the end of the day, and there's a distinct difference in the end of the day if you do what you just talked about, being intentional about your morning and not being intentional. So if there's anything, any nugget our audience could take out of what we talked about, that is so valuable. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, and it's like, we are going to struggle. Like, there are going to be, and like, it's okay to struggle. But like you said, you realize it, man, I didn't do it, and I didn't feel the same. I wasn't able to do better that day, but we don't go and beat ourselves up about it and go, I'm a fucking failure. I couldn't stick to the plan. I wasn't deliberate. It's okay if you make mistakes and struggle. Like, my measurement of success, I'm going to do better today than I did yesterday. That's it. I'm not saying I need 8% divided by 2% better at this specific thing. No, hey, if I didn't get up at 6 this morning, I slept until 6:10. Tomorrow I'm going to make sure I get up at 6:09. And now I'm training myself to go, hey, I'm doing better than I did yesterday. And it's totally achievable and it's reasonable. It's not, all right, I'm going to run a marathon tomorrow. That's going to be my penance. That's how I know I'm going to better. Like, it's going to set yourself up for failure. It's going to be much harder. Like, just measure how you measure your success. For me, it's I'm better than I did yesterday. Perfect.
Yeah, I would
successful in everything I did today.
I would recommend our audience to go look at the 1% rule, right? And maybe Brian and I will knock an article out on this, but just you don't focus on the end goal, but get 1% better, 1% better, 1% better over the course of a year. You're going to be really good at what you were trying to achieve.
Right. And like, in our line of work, we also know, like, tomorrow's not guaranteed. What I need it today. And I need to be able to do things I can do daily. I can't say it's great to have goals that are measurable that you can, look at. But I also go, my day tomorrow is not guaranteed, especially in those environments that I was in. It was, anything could happen tomorrow. I don't know what it is. So today I need to be the best version of me. I need to be able to do better today.
So what are you up to right now, James? I mean, what are you doing?
So I spend a good amount of my time. I volunteer with an organization called the Boulder Crest Foundation. So what they do, believe it or not, interestingly enough, is they teach the practices of post-traumatic growth to our veterans, our first responders, and law enforcement. So they have different programs for your profession. The one I went through was called Warrior Path. And, it was 90 days. And, talk about being curious. Like, that's the course to go to. Like, I thought war was hard, 90 days of that. I'm like, this is probably the hardest thing I ever did because, hey, all of this is, dependent on you. We're not coddling. We're not telling war stories. We're not doing any of that shit. We're here to put in hard work so you can grow and do better and become to serve your, your community again, to serve your country again as a better version of you, not to be stuck, I was, and I'm not anymore. So now what do I do type thing. So I have an amazing experience with that organization. And luckily they're close to where I live. So I have the opportunity to go down there when they have classes once a month, twice a month, to go volunteer and cook for the warriors that are going through those courses. So that's been a really fulfilling thing to me. On top of that, I feel like I've achieved probably the greatest, I guess, status in life, which, I'm a military spouse, so I'm a dependent. So that's a pretty huge accomplishment in the eyes of many people in my peer group. So when I'm not doing that, I'm a stay-at-home husband. My wife is still in the military. So she's got a pretty good source of information for when she gets out and she has to go through all these things when she retires here soon. And then additionally, I have a patent for a firearms part. So I go around and I look for companies who want, or organizations that either want to purchase it, or agencies, the military and whatnot. So that's been kind of a new and challenging experience for me.
That's called the default.com. It's the-default.com, correct?
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's kind of, the part is a representation of kind of what I've learned over the decades when it comes to, what is the human aspect, like us in a high stress environment, critical stress. It complements that and the foundational principles of marksmanship. And essentially what it does is everybody has a collapsible stock on an M4. It moves back and forth. You set that stock the way you want it, right? You set up your race car. I want my steering wheel here and everything. So what it does is allow, when you pull your stock out, it'll stop every time at that exact same spot you always want it to. So for better performance in those high stress situations. So whether you're being shot at, or you just jumped out of a plane, you got to get all your shit and it's dark, or the myriad of experiences. I wish I had one. It just slots right into your weapon. There's no modification. So every time you pull that stock, it stops where you want and you're good to go. So you have your highest level of performance when you're in a really bad critical stress situation.
Awesome. Well, we certainly are grateful for the time that we got to spend with you today. Again, I can't thank you enough for your service, for your growth, and again for your ongoing support of those transitioning out of the military. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys for the same. You have just as difficult a job as any of our veterans. You guys did the same stuff inside of our communities, and it's not easy, right? It's not always, I guess, it's not always reciprocated. So, thank you guys for doing that.
Thank you, James.
That's a wrap for us. Like always, we'll have some show notes available on, again, some of the information James provided, and maybe Travis and I will get around to get that article knocked out so we can attach that too. So thanks again for your time, and until next time, be well.
Have a good one, gentlemen.